Welcome. As you know, FIP is seeking to develop a series of podcasts where the FIP Chief Executive Officer has a conversation or two or three with a fellow leader in pharmacy around areas of shared interests. These have emerged during conversations that we had during the pandemic where values aligns and friendships have been forged. And the areas we'll discuss today really build on things that we have been talking about for the months and years just past. So before we start today, I'll just say a few words about me. I'm Catherine Duggan. I'm the Chief Executive Officer, nearly 5 years in post at FIP. And prior to that, I had roles in community pharmacy, hospital pharmacy, in academia, and in policymaking, as well as in the professional body in Great Britain. I'm so excited to be here today with a superstar in pharmacy, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Shelita Dattani. Shelley, over to you. A couple of words about you.
Thanks, Catherine. It's so great to be back with you today. My name is Shelita. My friends call me Shelly Dattani. I'm the Senior Vice President of Pharmacy Affairs and Strategic Engagement at Neighbourhood Pharmacies. But more importantly, I'm a practicing pharmacist. I'm a mother. I'm a wife. I'm a friend. And like to say now, a colleague and respected admirer of Catherine. So really excited to be here with you.
Well, the feeling's mutual, Shelley. And I have to say, that's something that we really tapped into. We can hold a position in life, maybe even get a leadership position associated with that or leadership responsibilities. But most of us are many things to many people. And I think that's part of what we wanted to talk about today. So why are you interested in these conversations, Shelley?
Oh, it's good, Catherine. I mean, Catherine and I met, I think knew each other a little bit beforehand, but really met, when I moved over to Neighbourhood Pharmacies and we're on an advisory board, and I think across a crowded room, we just really connected, and then we started these shared quarterly conversations during the pandemic, and on the agenda was to talk about pharmacy practice change and how we could support each other as two organizations, but we ended up just talking about humanity and some of our shared challenges. And if all of you can remember back to where we were in the spring and summer of 2021, we were all at the height of, immense stress, really at the cusp of change, vaccination starting across the world. But we really just took the time to, and really, I think, appreciated the time to get to know each other and express some of our vulnerabilities and challenges. And out of that came a lot of inspiration. And Catherine had a great idea that, maybe we should share our conversations with other people as well.
Yeah, I think it's so important to pull from those really awful times now when we look back, the little golden threads that kept us sane, because goodness me, we still need them. So Shelley, when you and I were thinking about the podcast, we always thought we'd start with 3. So this is the second of 3. We would really recommend colleagues go back and listen to the first, and don't hesitate to tell us if you'd like more. We thought we would start to touch on issues like work-life balance, the anomalies of the resilience mantra, be resilient, be more resilient, coming to you, which can make you feel less resilient. Some little top tips, if you could go back and tell your younger self, what advice would you give yourself? Any nuggets about career development and advancement, leading in practice, managing in crises, but also, all issues that emerged from our conversations. So we wanted to focus on a couple of issues each time, really to do a bit of a deep dive, give you, the colleagues listening, some insights into where we think we could share some good practices, where we haven't got it completely right over the years, and we've learned from that, some key take-home messages, and then what we would tell our 25-year-old selves if we could. My goodness me. So today we thought we would touch on authenticity, authentic leadership. There, I think it's really important, if we're going to be authentic about authenticity, Shelley, that we really think about vulnerability, self-awareness, humility, walking the walk, talking the talk, constant state of learning, even though that in itself can be quite exhausting. And I think I've got this from you hugely. It's about showing up as your authentic self, bringing your whole self to work, but not making yourself vulnerable. So we're going to have a great little time ahead. And we're aiming to leave people with a little set of key messages, little take-home, takeaway, if you like. Anything else you'd like to add, Shelley, as we introduce it?
I think you've covered it. I think it's a word that's tossed around a lot, but I think what's more important in as you said, being our authentic selves is sharing what it means to us. And I think everybody will have an idea of how they'd like to show up as an authentic person. And we're just going to share with you, I think, some of our thoughts.
Well, let's get right to it. I know that that's the purpose of the podcast, and there's nothing like getting into the issues almost as immediately as you can. My big question to start us off to you, Shelley, is what being an authentic human means to you. And then I'll do a little bit of reflection back to you. But, think about that. If somebody was to say to you, what does that mean? And not just even authentic professional, authentic human.
Yeah, I think it's as you said, Catherine, it's really thinking about bringing who you are. And I tell that to my daughters all the time, to whatever space you're in. So whether it's, me across a Zoom screen with you right now, whether it's me going out, for a coffee with a friend, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's, even in your patient care experiences, thinking about, showing up as your whole self, but also, understanding who the person is in front of you and asking a lot of questions to, I think, demonstrate that you are truly interested in other people and other people's lived experience. And that also helps form sort of who you are. So I think it's very much about, people will often say, well, what do you mean by that? Like bringing your whole self to work. And I think it's really thinking about all of the sides of who you are. And as you said, not being afraid to expose those, because I think traditionally as leaders and even as pharmacists sort of put up this armor, like, I'm the healthcare provider, I know all the answers. So I think it's about, exposing yourself to the fact that it's okay to not have all of the answers. And I think we saw a lot of that during COVID.
I think you're right, Shelley. And I think you mentioned something right at the beginning in your introductory words about, of course, you're a pharmacist and a leader and very, very highly regarded in that way. But you're also a mum and a daughter and a friend and a wife and all these other layers to ourselves. What value do you think being all of those people in one brings to the authenticity argument? And I'll come on to the risks later, but what value do you think it brings?
Yeah, I think it allows people to see the humanity side, or at least I hope it does. I think it provides a safe space for people to then feel like they can also be authentic, that they can share their fears and they can share their concerns. And we're living in a world where, we're still very much in a pandemic. We have an exhausted workforce. We have a lot happening in the healthcare system. We have challenges globally every day that we read about. To get really philosophical, we don't have a lot of time here on this planet. So my view is just really to encourage people to just be real. I think about that as I get older as well, that there's not really interested in performatism or pretense or, I just want to be real.
Yeah, it's really important. I think perhaps that's what the pandemic gave the both of us, the insight into the mantra of fake it till you make it just doesn't seem real anymore. Do you have an example, Shelley? Do you have something that you can bring from real life? Understanding some people who might be listening to this think that we know what we mean, but what would it mean for someone if you have an example for us?
Well, maybe I'll use a patient care example. So I was talking to a group of people about vaccine hesitancy. I was thinking about that actually when I was thinking about talking to you today. And I think that for many people who might be listening to this, who might be pharmacists, I think the challenges that we face with the patients in front of us who are not sure, who maybe have want to take some agency in their own health, who may have apathy about the pandemic or vaccination or whatever it is. I really try to tell people that I don't know all the answers and let's figure it out together. And I think that sort of breaks a barrier when I'm thinking about myself as a pharmacist. And I also do that, I think, if I'm presenting at a board meeting or if I'm talking to colleagues, I think it's really okay to give yourself the permission to say, let's find this out together. I can understand that this is a challenge, and let's work together. So whether it's sort of shared decision making with a patient, or solving a problem with a colleague, or just, your children ask you a question and you're just not sure. Give them permission that it's okay to ask, or it's okay to be scared, and that you can work together to see if you can get through it.
I think that's absolutely great. So it's a bit like, how can I put this? We've often been taught that there's a work-life balance, which we'll come on to in our third podcast as well. But really, this whole idea that you are yourself, you can act professionally when you're at work, but you are still Shelley, I'm still Catherine. And there's the issues there that, questions that your daughters might ask you can inform how you can be even a better professional. You don't need to separate that out, I think. Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. Yeah. I don't know whether you had any questions for me, Shelley, whether there's anything at your fingertips.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would ask you in your role as the CEO of FIP, and just as we talked about in the last podcast, is you're, Catherine, you're a leader. And even if you didn't have the title of Chief Executive Officer of FIP, I think your qualities, to me, still convey leadership, and people will look to you for that and for mentorship. So when you think about your leadership, what do you think authentic leadership is?
Well, we talked about this extensively, Shelley, about the fact that when you are early in your career, you put on different masks or faces for different parts of your life. And that includes having a work face and being very professional about it. And I've lived and breathed pharmacy for all of my life. My husband's a pharmacist. Loads of my friends are pharmacists. If you start to have different faces or different approaches, I think that is really exhausting, especially when you work in roles like ours, which they don't just stop at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. in the evening. You have to kind of be on it when you're working. So, and I'm quite an open person, but I seem to attract quite a lot of feedback or critique, if you like. And I could find that was quite a difficult balance, being authentic, being true to yourself, and then exposing myself a little bit too much to criticism or being too much of X and Y and Z. And I think as you get older, you also know that you're always going to be too much for some people, and not to worry. So we were discussing about this, Shelley. I think one of the top things I would say about developing your own leadership style and your own followership style, and being a good leader can also mean being a good follower. I think that's a nice lesson to learn, would be the Russian dolly approach. Now, you get those little dolls that sit in the bigger dolly and the bigger dolly and the bigger dolly. And the bigger dolly looks exactly like the little tiniest dolly, and they all sit together. For me, this is a very good analogy, because it kind of means that you can still be, in my case, Catherine, on the outside when I don't know people so well. I don't have to put on a facade too much, but I kind of work on layers of protection for myself, so that I'm still Catherine on the outside, but somebody doesn't know my innermost feelings or thoughts. But as they might get to know me and we develop a good friendship like you and I may share things that I feel comfortable to share in that moment. And I think, I think if we were going to give our younger selves a bit of advice, it would be that kind of tool, so that you can still be yourself, Shelley, but you're not oversharing or making yourself far too vulnerable. And I don't think that's just a work learning. I think that's another thing, that to be authentic, learn how to be good in your job, and that will help you be good in other parts of your life. And I'm sure your daughters would really kind of get value from the idea of thinking about how to be authentic, but also not exposing themselves too much, because that's the other worry in today's world with all our social media and everything else. I don't know, Shelley, whether that's a top tip for us to maybe come back to right at the end, but it's definitely something I've learned. And I'm going to ask you a question. In all the times when you've sought to be authentic, when has been the time that you've had to hide your feelings around something? Do you have an example of that kind of shows how you've managed that exposure without losing face in that moment?
It's really important. You've said a lot of great things. And I think there's, as authentic people and people who really just, I also wear my heart on my sleeve. And so sometimes, and I'll think of, times where, perhaps we're negotiating with governments about pharmacy policy, and we may be frustrated about not getting what we want, but we have to stay on course and stay on track and stay aligned. And so you have to really be mindful of regulating emotion, of sticking to the facts, of working productively. And so I think to me that comes into it as well or you may not like something that your boss has said, or you may be frustrated with your team. I think there's an element of always being professional, always being kind, setting some boundaries, but being honest and true, and asking questions that are authentic, that speak to the truth. And I think you can do both of those things very well. And I agree with you, as you get older, you also learn that likability is great for those of us who want everyone to like us, but not everybody is going to like aspects of you, or maybe your perspectives or things you say. And that's also okay. And I think we can give ourselves the agency and permission to say that some of us have slightly different worldviews or perspectives, and that's okay. We don't have to change ourselves or who we are to conform to other people, because that's what authenticity is about as well, right?
I think that's possibly one of the most important things to say. So being authentic doesn't mean that you have to live and breathe all of your values to expose yourself. It means that you know who you are, and that when people challenge you, you don't take that as a personal wound or a personal slight in some way. Of course, somebody may go ahead and then slight you, and you're perfectly able then to become insulted by it. I think that's a really important point, Shelley, and something that maybe a bit of maturity helps with. But the top tips then around authenticity is work out what your values are, work out what you stand for, and then make sure they are evident in the outer you to the first people that you meet. And then your family and your friends would recognize you if they saw you in the workplace. They'd recognize the way you work and the way you speak and the way you act. But I love it. I love this idea that you're not going to take every single challenge as a slight at all. Because I think when I was younger, I used to. I think I wanted everybody to like me. So then when somebody didn't, which is totally their right, I would be kind of upset with that. That's a really good, strong approach, Shelley. Do you think there's other downsides to being authentic? Because it is a bit of a buzzword, isn't it?
It is. And you just reminded me of something that someone said to me once, is that what other people think about you is really none of your business. And I think about that a lot. I think that's brilliant. I think the perception, as you said, of being authentic is sometimes, gosh, that person is really sharing a lot of, I don't know, their human side, or they're really, they're telling me that they're scared, or they're telling me that they're nervous. And I think traditionally, if we look at leadership 30, 40 years ago, it might have been looked at as a sign of weakness. But I really think, and I don't know if you read Brene Brown, I read a lot of Brene Brown, who talks about vulnerable leadership, and really that vulnerability really brings strength. It brings trust. I think it's critical, and I think it spreads. I think it spreads like the virus. If you are with the boundaries that we talked about, Catherine, that you have to set as a professional to some degree, if you bring your true self and bring that vulnerability in your leadership, I do think it's contagious, and I think that it allows other people to feel safe. And that'll be sort of part of our next podcast to do the same. So I think it's critical now, because we have such a strange workforce. We have so many outward pressures. We are trying to climb so many mountains in pharmacy to get to the next level, to harness what we've done during the pandemic. So in order to see those challenges in front of us and overcome some of those and get to the next side, I think we have to expose ourselves to talking about risk, talking about what we're nervous about as leaders and as professionals, so that we can foster that amongst all of us. And I think that also applies to when we deal with other healthcare providers. I think it's an opportunity for collaboration to show authentic and vulnerable leadership as well. And I think we have a long way to go and lots of opportunities to collaborate together in healthcare.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And there's enough work out there in healthcare for all of us to play our part, really. It's not like anybody
Right.
is immediately curing the whole world's ills at any point in time. So the top tip then I would say would be understand yourself, understand your values, really wear them loud and proud, but maybe create different levels of vulnerability for yourself so that you're not feeling attacked for being you. You're understanding the strength of authenticity and living with it really, really well. Yeah, that's really good. Any final questions or points, Shelley, for me or for the audience listening in?
I just think, I just think it's what you said. Just be open to, you might be a Russian doll, or you might be an onion with peeling of your layers. Be open to being your whole self, and give people the agency to do that as well, and create, sort of try to foster that environment in whatever connection you're having, to make people feel welcome to share who they are as whole people. And I think that's really the way to go.
Another little top tip, Shelley, that you and I had discussed during our pandemic chats would be around understand the examples you might give when you're being open and authentic, so that you're not exposing anything, you're not exposing the family secrets, so to speak, but any little nugget that you're giving, you would be happy to hear back from someone else. And that's a really big top tip I would give my 25-year-old self, because I come from a family who loves telling stories about things. Don't, tell a story that you're going to be absolutely happy to hear back. People love that. And you know what? I have to say, if we had a bit more humility in the world and a bit more of a sense of humor, I wonder how many of the crises that are existing without any kind of human involvement, we would get through much more easily, Shelley. I have to say, bit of compassion, bit of humility, bit of understanding. We don't always have to be right, or we don't always have to be seen to be right. They're really top tips, I think, for authenticity. Yeah, I think so.
It just made me think of one more thing, if I may, and you just touched on it, and I think it's very much who you are. I think it's about levity. Like, don't take yourself so seriously either, and I think that can really just lighten up a room immediately as we're, faced with challenges and crises. I think there's lots of room. And again, with boundaries, but I think levity is really, really important. A sense of playfulness, I think that brings, can reduce the stress level in a room tremendously.
We saw that, didn't we, over the Zooms, when we didn't have people contact, the more someone in a Zoom call, especially those big groups that we were part of, Shelley, could disarm or make people giggle a little bit, the more we got good work done. So that can still happen. Yeah. Some people may be a bit nervous of that, thinking maybe that makes me look unprofessional. Quite the opposite. It makes you look human. And then I think people can see your professionalism shining through. So that's a really good point, Shelley. And you know what? Taking yourself less seriously is better for everyone. It's just, it's a top tip, isn't it? Don't believe your own hype. Got some really nice tips in here, Shelley. Any final words, Shelley? Otherwise, we can sign off for this one.
I think you said it. I think it's lots of things we can continue to work on. Lots of tips that I'm going to take away from this conversation that I want to continue to work on to be authentic, so that I can be a role model for whoever it is, that 25-year-old self, my daughters, anybody in the room with me. If I can teach one thing and learn one thing, I'm completely happy.
Well, I must say you're a complete role model to me and to many others as well. And the interplay between being your authentic self during times of crisis and normal, as well as thinking about how not to make yourself vulnerable or weak. So that feeds well into the third podcast that we're doing today, around resilience and that word and its misuse and its misplace, and thinking about how authenticity is a strength, not a weakness, for us to learn from. So I think that we'll sign off now, Shelley, and we'll look forward to meeting everyone again on our third podcast. But also, if those of you who haven't listened to the first one wish to do so, you can listen to them independently, no problem. Or you will find that the themes all weave together, which is why we thought it was a really nice way to pull apart these issues. Shelley, you've been a star. Thanks a million.
Thanks, Catherine. So much fun.